We are live. Hello, this is Christian Idealism. Today we're going to do something different. We're going to be responding to a YouTube atheist named Underlings, and we're gonna respond to 4 of his videos actually. The first one's going to be on the Kalam. The second one's going to be the Counter-Kalam. The third one's going to be he tries to prove that God didn't create the universe, and then the fourth one is going to be on the historicity of the universe. So, all right, let's get started. So, Tim, you want to screen share?
Can you see it?
Yeah.
Awesome.
All right, now everyone mute their mic so that we can listen to this.
And then pause it and then tell me when you need to pause.
Yeah, I know. Okay.
Theists attempting to provide a rational justification for their beliefs often turn to one of the cosmological arguments that use certain observations about our universe and logic in an attempt to conclude the existence of a unique being they call God. The arguments are nothing new, but in recent years one version, called the Kalam cosmological argument, has gained popularity, especially among Christians. The wording of the argument can vary somewhat, but it basically posits the following points. Everything that begins to exist has a cause of its existence. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause of its existence. Since no scientific explanation can account for the cause of the universe, it must be due to a personal agent, known as God, that chose to create the universe.
All right, stop it.
A possible naturalist.
Yeah, that's actually not the argument. He already strawman the argument already. There's no fourth premise in the Kalam.
Well, I think. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say I can already sense a personal attack on William Lane Craig.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, he actually is criticizing William Lane Craig's version of the Kalam.
Yeah, I mean,
but I think.
No, you go. I interrupted.
I didn't hear what you said. I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say you go ahead. I interrupted that one.
Oh, but I think he's failing to realize that William Lane Craig put forth a even more or a more advanced version of the argument with this debate with Sean Carroll. I guess advanced not the right word for it, but sort of a different version. Essentially, the first premise goes, or second premise goes that if the universe came into existence, then it has a transcendent cause, and this kind of gets rid of the argument that it presupposes Aristotelian causality. So I think he should probably attack that first off, but we'll see where he goes with it.
Yeah. All right.
Counter to this argument is that perhaps the universe oscillates, expanding and collapsing in an infinite series of events with no beginning, and thus it never began to exist.
Okay, stop it.
The point of a cosmological argument is.
I mean, even if you were to say that the universe, there's a big bang, and in a big, it comes expands and it comes back together over time. That's kind of that model has been it's been debunked. Like even Vilenkin said that would if the universe were to come back together, it would not re-expand like that.
All right. So essentially, he says it'd be highly unstable.
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of like Sean Carroll's model. Not exactly, but isn't that kind of what he puts forward?
Yeah, but
I don't think Sean Carroll really.
Yeah, but the thing with these models is that you can make up any model.
Yeah,
for the Big Bang you want.
It's
not
ad hoc.
Exactly. Any eternal universe model is going to be automatically ad hoc because that's just not where the physics points to. I mean, Johanna, would you agree with that overall? Johan, you there?
Sorry. Yeah, it's like inventing stuff to get to a preconceived conclusion, which is kind of ridiculous. I'd also like to point out that the whole thing is kind of shot through anyway when you realize, when you get to the Planck epoch, right? The Big Bang?
Yeah.
Quantum gravity takes over, and when quantum gravity takes over, you're talking about working space-time, which means there's no space at that point. No space, no universe. So, yeah, everything we know from quantum gravity pretty much undermines that whole notion.
And and how much do you want to bet this guy doesn't even hold to that model? It again, ad hoc. He's just saying that to try to refute the argument.
He's essentially. I
Well,
think he's just putting forth.
Yeah, different model. Yeah, we'll go over the video, but yeah, he presents like different models to try to avoid the conclusion. All right, let's continue the video.
To provide justification for believing in the existence of God, theists often add a few more conditions to eliminate this naturalistic explanation. An actual infinite cannot exist. A beginningless temporal series of events is an actual infinite. Therefore, a beginningless temporal series of events cannot exist. These conditions also help counter the question that naturally arises: what created God? If the answer to that is some greater God created God, that leads to the question, what created that God, and so on into infinity. So the theist response is that God never began to exist. Instead, he has always existed as an uncaused, beginningless, timeless, spaceless, changeless, eternal, and immaterial being who must be all-powerful, all-knowing, all-present, all-loving, perfectly moral, and perfectly benevolent. If you're a theist, this argument may sound highly persuasive, but all you have to do is analyze each claim in turn to see that the entire argument is founded on fallacies and factual errors. Let's begin with the first premise. Everything that begins to exist has a cause of its existence. Some theists claim this premise is intuitively obvious and needs no further justification. After all, everything we've ever seen begin to exist appears to do so through some cause. Setting aside the fact that many people disagree that such a claim is intuitively obvious, this argument is nothing more than an appeal to intuition fallacy, because intuition is not an indicator of truth. One simply has to look at how the sun and moon apparently move across the sky while the earth seems to stand perfectly still in order to see how intuition can lead one to a conclusion that's the exact opposite of reality. To make matters worse for the premise, at least one observable phenomenon from quantum mechanics arguably contradicts it. Elemental particles can randomly appear and disappear.
Okay.
He's gonna talk about quantum vacuum.
Yeah. What's your
That's incredibly stupid too, because the notion of the quantum vacuum, if you understand the physics behind that, it simply is, the reason there is a quantum vacuum is that the Heisenberg uncertainty principle says you can't have any, state that is has a precise value of energy momentum at the same time, okay? It has to fluctuate back and forth, and this applies to everything. You think it wouldn't apply to empty space, but it does apply to empty space as well, hence we get the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, okay? Or rather, the quantum vacuum, okay? Now, the problem with this is the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, it relies on, the whole derivation actually comes from a lesser-known uncertainty principle in pure mathematics, okay? It applies to wave mechanics. And so you have, whenever there's wave mechanics there, you have this uncertainty principle. It relies on, and look at what's in the uncertainty principle itself: position and momentum, right?
Yeah.
Or energy and time, etc. Those are defined spatially. Those concepts are defined spatially, and the derivation of that entire principle is derived from wave mechanics, which has to do with space, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the problem with it, there isn't any space before the Big Bang.
Yeah.
So there's no quantum vacuum before the Big Bang, so this whole notion of it just tunneling out of a vacuum, it makes no sense. There is no quantum vacuum before the Big Bang because there is no space-time before the Big Bang.
And that's where you get quantum gravity to explain the space-time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So that falls apart. That is not only falls apart, that doesn't even get off the ground. If you look at the actual physics of that's not even a valid.
Yeah, it's not even a valid claim. Exactly. So.
Right.
And to go back on what he said, that everything that begins to exist has a cause, is just an appeal to intuition. He still hasn't provided an example of anything just popping into existence out of nothing.
He is right in the sense that, we shouldn't, intuition is not always correct. I would agree with him on that.
But in in this case, it's definitely right because I've never seen anything just pop into existence out of
Yeah,
nothing.
exactly.
That's like
Right, but still,
Uh-huh.
even he says if he's arguing that we shouldn't trust causality because it's intuitive, then maybe we should probably that might sort of disregard the scientific method in a sense because the scientific method is almost
yeah,
undergirded by causality.
and he's kind of in saying that it's just an appeal to intuition, and if he wants to go on the route of things can just pop into existence, that he's gonna have to appeal to like a David Hume type of notion of causality, which is pretty ad hoc in my opinion. Kind of like the model he, because Hume basically says, if you can imagine something just popping into existence, it's like reasonable. But I think that's pretty ad hoc, and there haven't been any examples of anything just popping into existence.
All right, let's continue the video.
Vacuum with no evident cause. So it is an error of fact to definitively state that everything that begins to exist has a cause. We simply cannot honestly make that claim as a given premise. Furthermore, everything we observe seemingly beginning to exist has actually already existed before in some prior configuration. To quote Carl Sagan, we are made of star stuff. Even our very thoughts are constructed of matter and energy that began to exist billions of years ago with the Big Bang, and acquired their current configuration after countless interactions since then. Ultimately, the only things that can truly be said to have begun to exist are the conditions at the beginning of the universe, which have no evident cause for their existence. So a much more accurate restatement of the first premise would be, nothing that ultimately begins to exist has any evident cause of its existence. As is the case with claims based on intuition, reality often turns out to be the complete opposite. Premise 2. The universe began to exist. This premise hinges on what's actually meant by the universe in this context. If it refers strictly to our universe, the time, space, matter, and energy that expanded from the Big Bang 13.7 billion years ago, then yes, you can indeed say the universe began to exist. But what if the universe includes more than just us? Parallel universes are a predicted consequence of quantum mechanics and other theories in physics. Supporters of the cosmological argument who follow the Abrahamic religions claim a single God created everything that exists. So in this context, I suspect the universe actually refers to the totality of existence, which I'll refer to as the metaverse to avoid confusion. And that poses a problem for the premise, because we lack sufficient evidence to claim what conditions exist beyond the boundaries of our universe. To try to do so based on what we can currently observe would be a hasty generalization fallacy. Like primitive societies beyond Earth must be composed mainly of gases, liquids, and solids, when in reality almost all of it is vacuum. Thus, we can't say that the metaverse began to exist. So if premise 2 is not limited to just our universe, it should be reworded to say, the metaverse may or may not have had a beginning.
Okay, stop.
Theists grant the exception of...
Okay, so with the whole metaverse thing, I mean, firstly, can you mute your mic real quick? I'm echoing. Tim. Tim. I'm echoing from...
Let's see here.
Okay, what I was going to say with regard to the metaverse, he's actually wrong when he says that quantum mechanics predicts parallel universes. That's only based on one interpretation of quantum mechanics, which is the many worlds interpretation. So that claim's kind of false.
Plus, even if
Secondly,
it's true, that would all, I mean, it would turn. The whole notion of the many worlds interpretation is that it's like different branching trees of the universe, of possible histories. So even if there is
Right.
a quantum mechanical multiverse, that still began at the Big Bang. It's just different
Right.
paths of our universe,
Yeah, it fails to escape the this idea that you can escape a beginning beginning of the totality of the universe is just utterly false with the multiverse, at least.
because I know the Blanken theorem applies to the multiverse as well.
Yeah, correct.
Now, of course, they're going to have models that try to avoid a beginning, a universe, a metaverse with a beginning. But even then, it's really ad hoc. Yeah, it could work, but it's still going to be ad hoc. Like that's kind of the whole point of the premise. It's not necessarily proving that the metaverse of the universe had a beginning, but rather pointing out that it's more probable based on the evidence, because there's simply no evidence that we live in a eternal multiverse or something like that. So it's just basically ad hoc to say that we can create these different models of cosmology to avoid a beginning. So yeah,
Okay,
right.
are you guys getting any echo now?
No.
Um,
Yeah, no.
Okay, it's better. Okay, I fixed that. That's good. I'm glad I can accomplish things like that. Okay.
Beginninglessness to God,
Oh,
but not
wait,
to
wait.
anything else, claiming that
Yeah,
a metaverse.
share screen. Okay.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oops.
All right, and then you can begin once you share screen it.
Yeah.
Would have to have begun to exist, whereas God did not. However, their inability to provide justification for this claim makes it a special pleading fallacy. Point 3 concludes, therefore the universe has a cause of its existence. Since premises 1 and 2 have had to be changed to fit reality, so does this conclusion. Therefore, the metaverse may or may not have a cause of its existence. Point 4 concludes, since no scientific explanation can account for the cause of the universe, it must be due to a personal agent, known as God, that chose to create the universe. This is actually the most bizarre claim made by the Kalam cosmological argument.
Yeah, because that's stop it.
Valid.
Yeah, here, stop it. Okay, yeah, because that's not what the argument actually says. Of course, it's the most bizarre claim because that's not what the argument says. It's like
I've seen people say the cause must be personal. I mean, I think in regards to getting to where you have to do more of a cumulative case.
Yeah.
Well, I do think it describes a personal God.
Well, just
yeah,
logically follows. I mean, if you read, if you watch Woodland Craig lecture, it just logically follows from those premises that it would be, it would have the attributes that we ascribe to God.
Right.
But yeah. All right, you can start the video again.
It's as if the argument simply skipped a number of critical steps. It presents a God of the gaps argument, using both an error of fact and an argument from ignorance fallacy. It's preceded by no premises to establish its claim that there aren't scientific explanations for the cause of our universe. It simply asserts that there aren't and ignores the theoretical evidence that contradicts the assertion. Nor is there any premise to establish why we would need that a personal agent, God, created the universe. This is known as a fallacy of 4 terms. Yet these often go even further, claiming that this God is timeless, spaceless, immaterial, changeless, eternal, uncaused, beginningless, all-knowing, all-powerful, all-present, all-loving, perfectly moral,
Whoa. No. Just no. In what way does the argument try to construct an all-loving, perfectly moral, perfectly benevolent God? I don't know.
Yeah, I've never
And
heard
what does it do
Quentin
that?
Craig say anything besides spaceless, timeless, and immaterial, and sometimes he'll go for the personal, but still, I've never heard him say, all loving, all present, whatever.
Right, and I don't understand why you put timeless and then beginningless.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I don't
it
think
doesn't
that's
really
a special pleading fallacy. I mean, we're dealing with a necessary being. Surely, if he holds abstract objects against
right,
he wouldn't say a special pleading if they didn't begin to exist.
Yeah, watch it. You see how he accuses the theist here of God of the gaps. He says this is an exact quote, but essentially he says we're just assuming that there's no scientific method, but this is just a naturalism of the gaps because he's saying, oh yeah, we don't know, but yeah, there's certainly some type of scientific or a
And if he's
physical
gonna bring
explanation of it. That's naturalism of the gaps.
Yeah, and if he's going to bring up some type of multiverse, I'd like him to provide some evidence for a multiverse. So, of course, there was that whole thing with the cold spot on Earth, but that was I actually found an article that I could link to. I'll probably link it in the comments after we're done with the hangout. That shows that it wasn't it wasn't exactly evidence for a multiverse. It was due to what they were observing it through. But yeah, so like you said, definitely naturalism of the gaps. I think we're good.
Yeah, we're good.
When pressed, theists will often insert additional conditions, which really have nothing to do with the initial premises. For example, they'll say that because our universe is so finely tuned for life, it must have been caused by an all-powerful, all-knowing God. Except that their argument is a fallacy of assumption, since it assumes that our universe is finely tuned for life. But the only place we know for certain where life can exist in this
the fine tuning of the universe is pretty much a fact. I mean, even A.C. Grayling said that in his dialogue with Peter S. Williams on
right, and fine tuning doesn't necessarily mean fine tuning is just this blanket term to cover all the the odds and ends that are like particular in our universe. But this isn't it doesn't necessarily follow that it's theistic, but fine tuning isn't really.
Yeah. I'll have to wait again.
The entire vast universe is on the surface of this one little planet. Even if we end up finding life on numerous planetary systems, the fact is that virtually our entire universe is filled with vacuum, intense radiation, gravity wells, and temperature extremes that are exceedingly hostile to life as we know it. Now, while it's true that slightly changing some of the fundamental constants of our universe, one at a time, could prevent life as we know it from developing at all, it's possible to change several constants significantly and still result in conditions suitable for life. In fact, it appears that entirely eliminating one of the four fundamental forces of our universe, the weak nuclear force, could still allow the appearance of carbon-based life.
Okay, stop.
Quantum mechanics predicts.
Okay. Well, notice how he literally just ignored the fact that most of the constants are
Tim, you're echoing again.
Oh, are you sure it's me?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I was muted.
Okay, yeah, we're good. I was saying, all right, so sure we can change some of the the weak nuclear force. But notice how he just shifted it from, okay, well, yeah, those things could be changed and life wouldn't be here. But look at this, that could be changed. Okay, well, he just basically dodged the fine-tuning argument. Like, he missed the whole point.
Yeah, I mean, the point of the fine-tuning, the point of the fine-tuning is it's not assuming that there has to be, life everywhere in the universe. It just says that life is possible, no matter, what type of life it would be.
Yeah,
this whole idea that there has to be life everywhere in the universe is just that's not what the fine tuning argument says.
Yeah, and he brought up black holes and whatever. Okay,
yeah.
Then explain why we're still living conscious creatures here on Earth.
Right, and he Neil deGrasse Tyson makes the same argument. It's outdated. It just I mean, we're talking fine tuning that if not in place would destroy the universe or destroy chemistry, destroy the gravitational constant. Gravity would clap back on itself, and the universe would be virtually nothingness in a sense. But yeah, I think he's going for low hanging fruits here.
All right, Tim, you can end the video.
All right, are we getting any echo? Somebody try talking here.
Echo.
Echo.
Yeah, echo. I'm getting echo.
Okay, well, will it matter as long as I mute my mic as soon as you guys start talking?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay,
You
then
can
we're
keep
gonna
on
do that.
searching. Just make sure you mute your
Yeah, I
mic.
know. Yeah. Okay.
The possibility of a metaverse spawning an infinite variety of universes. If that's true, then those universes would possess the entire range of possible constants, including all those capable of producing life, no matter how rare they might be. Since we don't yet know the process for creating universes, for all we know, any universes spawned by a metaverse would be inherently constrained to certain constants that happen to allow for life to evolve. You can't make claims of probability based on a single sample.
Okay, stop.
As for why atheists often conclude that God must have all these amazing characteristics,
Tim, stop.
part of it is due to the fact that time, space,
I'm not
and
even
energy
someone else has
Big
that.
Bang.
I'm not
It necessarily
doing
follows
anything.
then that God must be
I'm not. I heard breathing or something.
Yeah, I know.
Jake,
I know. I wanted to stop the video anyway.
Yeah.
All right, now mute the mic. Okay, so with the whole multiverse thing, that's kind of ad hoc. Like, if you're gonna try to avoid the fine-tuning argument and say that there's an infinite number of universes, that's really like then you're not even doing science anymore. Like you're trying to create some ad hoc explanation to avoid the fine-tuning argument.
Right, and even if we look at the multiverse, it derives out of cosmic inflation. But as Luke Barnes pointed out in his debate with Sean Carroll, it was that even if you have a multiverse with this cosmic inflation, it seems to me that the initial conditions which brought forth the multiverse would need some type of fine tuning in a sense. And I can link to that debate if to get more details on that.
Yeah, go link it when you can. And I might pop out real quick to try to join on my computer, so.
Okay, that's fine. All right, Tim, start the video.
Okay.
timeless, spaceless, and immaterial. And since he exists outside of time, he must also be changeless and eternal. The Abrahamic religions are monotheistic, which means their followers believe their God to be the only true God. So the idea that God has a God is anathema to them. That means their God must be uncaused and beginningless, the very first cause. And because our universe is so huge, magnificent, and perfectly designed, God must be omniscient and omnipotent in order to have created it. That would make him the greatest being capable. As such, he would naturally also be omnipresent, all-loving, perfectly moral, and perfectly benevolent. But on closer inspection, each of these attributes becomes less convincing than the last. If logic and observation of our universe are the basis for the Kalam cosmological argument, then what observations would logically impact a being that is timeless, spaceless, immaterial, argument? Then what observations would logically impact a being that is timeless, spaceless, immaterial, changeless, and eternal? Well, for starters, how could he even think? Thinking is a process that inherently requires a change in one's mind over time. Also, the only things we've ever observed that are capable of thought are purely material entities. Thus, a timeless, changeless, immaterial being would logically be
Okay, stop it.
one might argue
That is the dumbest. I mean, he's literally assuming materialism by saying that thinking or thoughts require matter to exist. What do you think about that, Johann? I mean, you get the whole quantum cognition thing, right?
Hold on, say that again.
He's trying to argue that since thinking requires time, then therefore God can't. Then
Well, yeah, if
therefore
thoughts
God
are
would
outside
time.
of space-time, I mean, we perceive them in time. But the thing about it is the whole thought is going on outside space-time. Now, an example of that is a platonic form you have access to. You think with it, even though it's a timeless thing, I mean, we're perceiving it in this temporal context. Our consciousness kind of having this perception of time, but what we're thinking with is not in time, and you could, for that matter, just play a game with B theory. You could say there's this person thinking, right, on this film strip.
Yeah.
We'll just freeze the film strip and take a slice out of it.
Then
He's
you get,
still thinking in that instant, even though that instant is no longer in time.
Yeah.
So that's pretty.
That kind of just destroys. Like
Exactly.
he's assuming that like materialism and that only material beings can have thoughts.
That's stupid.
Yeah, it's so retarded.
And it presupposes the whole, a certain philosophy of mind as well.
Yeah, I know. It's so stupid. Even with dualism, you could have beings that think timelessly. So he's already presupposing a
Yep.
not just a philosophy of mind, but also a metaphysics as well. So
Yep.
once you understand the
linked,
whole quantum cognition thing, his argument just automatically falls apart.
Exactly.
All right, Tim.
that God can be mindless, yet still not. Something that should make sense to anyone who's used Google before. But applying knowledge
It sounds really bad.
Yeah, it's real glitchy sounding.
Yeah, it's really glitchy.
Oh,
You play it again, see if it'll work.
just a second. I'm really glitching out here. Oh.
He left.
It might just be the Hangout. Because when I tried to do it on my computer, it wouldn't let me. So I don't know if
Anyone
the
else
link screwed up.
want to share it?
I can't. I'm on my phone.
Yeah, I'm on my
Jason.
phone as well.
Okay, Johann.
I'm on my phone as well.
Yeah. I can't do it because let me try to do it real quick. Hold on, let me see if I can. Let me know when he's back in. Sorry, viewers, we're having technical difficulties.
Yeah, I think it might just be the Hangout itself.
Hold on, I'm gonna test it out real quick, see if I can. Okay.
All right, he's back in though.
Okay, good. Tim, you want to try that again? Yeah, it's doing the same thing on my computer. Okay, I'm gonna play it on mine real quick. See if it'll work. Can you guys hear that?
I didn't hear it.
Can you hear that or no?
No, I just hear you. That's it.
Yeah, it won't
I
work.
didn't hear a video.
Tim, you want to try it again, or Johanna, you want to try it?
Oh, good. Tim can do it.
Okay, let's try it on your computer because none of ours are working right now.
Can you send me the link again?
It's in
I
the chat.
exit my browser.
No, it's in the chat.
I had to leave the Hangout, and the chat doesn't show up after you
We're
leave.
gonna. Johanna, can you see the Johanna? You should be able to see it. The videos, the links.
Where?
They're in the chat. Not the Facebook chat, the group chat.
In the group chat. I don't see him here. Oh, wait, there's one of them.
Yeah.
Is
Why
this
can't
that
Tim play them?
Copy and paste all of the stuff in the group chat and post it in this group chat right here.
Okay. There are 4 videos, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
I was hoping this wouldn't happen, but
Yeah, I was too, but oh well.
all right, did you get it, Johanna?
If we can, maybe
Yeah, give me a second here.
maybe if
Okay.
we shorten it to like doing 2 videos this time and 2 videos next time.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can do. Well, it's up to you guys, but we'll see what happens. Too much time.
Yeah.
Because the
If we
2
can get this thing
videos.
going.
Well, once we get this first video done, the next 2 videos are very short, so it won't
Oh, I
be.
see.
Yeah,
Okay. And we're halfway done with this one, I think. So.
pretty much. Yeah.
There's one.
This is the first one.
Here's 2.
Oh no. Somebody talk.
3.
Yeah.
Hello?
And
This isn't good. Not good at all. Nope, not reliable.
4. You got them, guys?
Yeah. Okay. Do the crap. Just go to the one that click on one of them, and then if it says deconstructing the Kalam cosmological argument, pick that one.
Who's doing it?
You.
Me.
Yeah. Because we don't. No one else can do it right now.
Oh, okay. Let's see here. Cosmological. I mixed them up again now. Here, Counter-Kalam cosmological argument.
No, the deconstruction of the Kalam cosmological argument.
Let the diseases exist. Here we are.
Okay.
All right.
Here, just play it. Make sure we can hear it, and then we should be able to get it going.
Oh, someone else is playing it?
No, you are.
Oh, no, hold on here. I just heard it. I realized it was... No. Oh, I know what's wrong. What time do you want me to put it at?
10
Yeah,
minutes.
okay, I see it.
10 minutes? You guys hear it?
Has a god is anathema.
Yeah. Okay, I can hear it.
That
We're
means
good.
their god must be uncaused and
Yeah,
beginning
we were a little bit ahead of this.
first cause. And because our universe is so huge
Just let it play.
and perfectly designed, God must be omniscient and omnipotent in order to have created it. That would make him the greatest being conceivable. As such, he would naturally also be omnipresent, all-loving, perfectly moral, and perfectly benevolent. But on closer inspection, each of these attributes becomes less convincing than the last. If logic and observation of our universe are the basis for the Kalam cosmological argument, then what observations would logically impact a being that is timeless, spaceless, immaterial, changeless, and eternal? Well, for starters, how could he even think? Thinking is a process that inherently requires a change in one's mind over time. Also, the only things we've ever observed that are capable of thought are purely material entities. Thus, a timeless, changeless, immaterial being would logically
Another
be
thing
mindless.
Yeah.
Argue that God could be
about
mindless
that,
yet
he's
still be all-knowing.
presupposing that
Something
everything.
that should make sense to anyone.
Yeah, I know.
He's presupposing that what is thinking in the first place is material.
Exactly. Exactly. That's my
So
whole. That's my whole point.
Yep.
But applying knowledge still requires time and change. So any knowledge a timeless, changeless being might possess would be useless.
Yeah, but okay. Yeah, but guess
So,
what?
Essentially, everything
Okay, stop
the
it.
universe has shown us is that
Yeah, but guess what? Space and time are illusions because of quantum gravity. So that whole argument that it requires time to apply knowledge just again it just falls apart. Literally falls apart. Like it's not even.
Notice something. Almost all of these atheist objections, they usually rely on something to do with space-time and matter, right?
Yeah.
In arguments. I mean, there are different kinds of arguments. People are more sophisticated. No more had some more sophisticated kind of arguments, but for the most part, it relies on appeals to the physical world, right?
Yeah.
We've essentially emasculated them when it comes to being able to do that.
Exactly.
I mean, the whole frame in which they critique things, it's undermined.
Yeah.
There is no space-time, there is no matter. Therefore, you cut your hands off, essentially, and you have nothing to argue with.
Yeah.
All right.
complexity always develops from simplicity. From particles to molecules to stars to life to intelligence to technology, the march towards complexity requires simpler, earlier.
You guys watching, or should we just listen?
No, just keep on playing. Yeah, we're watching it.
And while the complex can certainly devolve into the simple afterward, simplicity must ultimately exist before complexity. So if God is uncaused and beginningless, then does it not logically follow that he would be far too simple to possess an intelligent mind? Which is arguably the most complex thing we know of.
Huge problem with that. Well, there is a divine simplicity thing, right? But
Yeah.
there's different questions as to what that exactly means. It's not like he necessarily is simple in terms, complex in terms of parts, but complex in terms, or he could be simple. He can have many parts, but then simple in terms of like action or uniform, like some kind of integration level. Other thing about that though is the Wheeler-DeWitt equation, right? Or time, the whole thing with time being an illusion comes into play there, right? Where it's not a march from simple to complex doesn't apply because that's in time and God's outside time. The fact of the matter is, you look at the wave function in the universe, right? It has all quantum states in it, right?
Yes.
But when you look at what it is, so therefore it's the most complex thing you could have in some. And in one way, it's most simple because it's also most compact, as it were, right? Everything is integrated into one single state. But another way, it's the most complex because there's everything in it, right?
Yeah.
Maximum. But the thing about it is it's outside time. It's always existed and always will exist. Well, that's if you look at my quantum idealism, that's kind of synonymous with God, right? But the point is that even if you were to not have the idealism involved in that, you just leave universal wave function as is. it always exists. It's the most complex thing. And it was the first. It was the first thing that existed, and it's always existed.
Yeah. So that argument just goes on the window.
So using logic and observations of what we know of our universe provides evidence against the possibility that God is omniscient or even intelligent. So what about God necessarily being omnipotent in order to create the universe? Well, the closest thing we know of to infinite power is a singularity. While a black hole is not what people have in mind when they say that God is all-powerful, and black holes are so dense with matter they're the opposite of anything immaterial. There is mathematical evidence that predicts that black holes create new universes. In fact, it's possible our own universe was created by a singularity in another universe. If the equations are correct, then you don't need omnipotence in order to create a universe. All you need is some fundamental matter.
Okay, pause.
A lot of matter. But you don't.
Pause.
Okay, in what way does this answer the question of why anything exists, or why? I mean, all he did was kick the can further down the road by
Tim,
trying to say that. Yeah, go ahead.
You still need a universe that, or something for that argument to apply, that universe would also have to have black holes, right? Like if
Tim,
our universe was created by a black hole, that universe would exist. Furthermore, that universe would have general relativity in it because that's what explains Big Bangs, right? I mean, rather black holes, right?
Right.
The fact of the matter is, the reason there is a Big Bang in the first place is because of general relativity. So that universe has general relativity as well, and therefore it would also have a Big Bang. Therefore, it would have a beginning, and you can't go. You have this infinite chain of Big Bangs, which that is infinite. That's the only way out of it. Is this infinite? Either that has a first cause or an infinite regress. Infinite regress is no good, so therefore it has to have a not a Big Bang, not a black hole that caused it. Whatever the first universe was.
Plus, not only that, but with the whole idea that our universe came from a black hole, isn't that like one of the potential solutions to the what's it called, the information paradox?
I think
like there's yeah, but the holographic principle undermines that, and that's pretty much consensus now. So
yeah, so that's got it anyway.
Exactly. So this whole
whole thing is based on very. You know what else I realized with his critique on omniscience?
What?
A lot of these people have very limited imaginations. I could figure that out, that it was like a false, what he had, his critique there was false. But even without that, the very fact that I could think of that, it just demonstrates how limited their imaginations are when it comes to like trying to say what could and could not be possible.
Yeah. And that's kind of like the whole
singularity to
No, you can go on. Play the video.
produce a plausible explanation for the existence of our universe. As I mentioned in a previous video, virtual world and artificial intelligence technologies are advancing at an exponential pace. Within a few decades at most, we will almost certainly develop virtual worlds that will be indistinguishable from the real world, and likely populate them with artificially intelligent beings that may be unaware they live in virtual reality. We ourselves could be just such beings. If so, then our creator wouldn't have to be any more powerful, intelligent, or impressive than your average computer game designer.
Yeah. Yeah, pause it. This is the part. This is the hilarious part.
I mean, we literally have, we're just 2 steps ahead of them the whole way. I mean, that literally is part of the answer to that problem is literally part of the digital physics argument.
I was like, I knew this was going to happen. I mean,
yeah,
I've seen
qubit unpacking would prevent that from. I mean, it's a clever argument there, but qubit unpacking, the whole, qubit unpacking our Feynman universal simulator program, a problem, just shuts that whole argument down. If there is a simulator, that universe will have to have qubits in it as well. Therefore, it'll also have to be quantum mechanical. Therefore, it'll also have to have non-realism and be virtual. You can't have this whole thing. So, say we are, and it's the same thing as the black hole thing. It's if our universe is the product of a black hole, then that universe has to be created by God as well. Anyway, Same thing with this. If we're inside of a simulation, that universe upstairs would also have to be a simulation as well. Inside of a, we have to, at some point, it rests on something non-material because it couldn't, you know.
It would all, yeah, it would just be immaterial all the way up.
Yep.
So
Even if you did an infinite regress on that one, right? On simulation thing.
yeah,
You just like, you know, qubits, you know, it just that would have a that would still be immaterial all the way up. It would just feel like an endless chain of quote unquote gods, as it were.
yeah,
Or a single top one, you know.
yeah.
It's so funny how that happens.
The whole, like, not just his arguments, but like literally the whole way he's like the framework of which he's basing his arguments on, like just that itself doesn't work.
Yeah.
Automatically. And that's the hilarious part with idealism.
It shuts everything down, you know.
Yeah, exactly. All right.
The physics actually alone, even without just getting idealism, a lot of that just shuts us down, you know?
Yeah.
Plus the physics reduces to idealism, but yeah, the physics just shuts down these counter arguments.
There's no evidence that we're virtual beings populating a virtual universe, but then there's no evidence that any timeless, changeless.
Okay.
How was this video? Okay, 2011. Okay, I can't. I hadn't popularized JMCA's computer code yet. That came about 6 months later, it seems. And you know, I hadn't popularized the virtual reality physics, so we can't judge him too much on this.
Yeah.
This is before the entire internet got nuked with the whole digital physics stuff.
Yeah. So we'll give him that. Just
yeah, he's still living in Muggle land before everyone had the red pills available. All right.
Material omnipotent or omniscient being exists either. But at least the virtual world hypothesis enjoys the benefits of being supported by naturalistic, real-world precedents. We know that virtual worlds and artificial intelligence are possible because they already exist, even though they're not yet advanced enough to pass for reality. Furthermore, our world contains many virtual worlds, which implies that the odds we live in a virtual world are far greater than the odds we live in a...
yeah.
Odds from simulate, it doesn't matter. I mean, say we are. It doesn't matter.
It literally, because, you know, eventually, you know, it'd always be immaterial, and therefore, you know, that would automatically get you theism.
Yeah, I mean, it's yeah. Feynman Universal Simulator shuts that down in no time.
The God hypothesis, however, requires resorting to the unimaginable complexity of an all-powerful, all-knowing, all-present supernatural being, something for which we have no precedents whatsoever. As the philosopher Bertrand Russell said, whenever possible, substitute constructions out of known entities for inferences to unknown entities.
That's not a problem anymore either, because we have the whole conscious ground. I can't complain because quantum idealism hadn't shot off at that point, but the whole
yeah,
it's very conceivable. We just have you know, Hoffman model stuff with conscious realism all the time with smaller conscious agents. All this is the top conscious agent.
I'll be right back. You guys can continue, but I gotta do something real quick. I'll keep on.
Oh yeah.
I'll keep
all right. Are you coming back, Kyle?
Yeah, I'll be back. Just give me a few minutes.
Cool. Yeah.
Theists may object that the virtual world hypothesis merely raises the question of what created our programmer's universe. Who knows? Physics of his universe could differ greatly from our own.
Not greatly enough.
Yeah, it's...
We know why, because it has to have quantum mechanics or it can't simulate qubits.
Exactly.
So even if you pull the evil genius problem, and you say it's upstairs, you can't know what's going on upstairs, well, actually we do. Like, the very fact that we can learn certain things about our simulation tells us that we can learn something about what's going on behind the illusion. Even if our, what?
I was just gonna say something's telling me he hasn't been doing his homework on this and kind of just
repeating
whatever he's heard.
This is a 6-year-old video, so this is dated. I have to give
that old.
Yeah.
With its origin perhaps being even more easily identifiable as naturalistic. But even if his universe was created,
that's the other thing. And granted, I have to, point out to him that he's also being dated here. So I give him some credit, since idealism hadn't shot off as a. I didn't even have the digital physics argument up yet at that point.
So, like, basically around this
so
time.
that whole notion of it being naturalistic versus supernatural, it kind of, that whole dichotomy has been undermined by idealism. We have theistic naturalism now. We have, we're no longer operating in a dualistic natural versus supernatural paradigm. They're two sides of the same reality, and they're both sides are equally understandable by science.
Yeah, and around this time, I think is when the whole idealism thing kind of shot.
Yeah. I was doing prototype arguments. Like I had the universal Orkawar argument, which it's kind of nice for historical development purposes, and there are some valid concepts in it, but there are some of the minor details of the physics that are not, like, I don't think the OR mechanism is valid, for example. The self-collapsing wave function equals mind is a valid concept, but the precise details of how it happens is a little bit off. Anyway, let's go.
God. What are the chances it would be any god of our universe? Considering that most virtual worlds we've created have pantheons that do not include gods from existing religions, that suggests it's very unlikely we'd have any knowledge about the god of our programmer's universe.
Okay, now that is an interesting issue to raise, right? Okay, see, now that problem though is that's not an issue of theism versus atheism anymore, though. That's an issue of which God is the right God. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly.
And what you could do with that, it wouldn't be a simulation in the proper way, like with people upstairs in like playing computer games and so on. But there could be, you've seen this kind of thing happen before in emanationist, if you like Neoplatonism has this, Kabbalah has this, Hermetic, like the whole kind of branch of thinking has this, where there are these like emanations, right? Where there's like nesting levels of reality.
Yeah.
And what's the thing with that is some of those actually include esoteric versions of, exoteric religions, right? Which could even include Christianity. And I've seen they have these hierarchies of like even Paul mentioned that whole thing about principalities and powers and these various hierarchies, right?
Yeah.
So for number one, who's to say that we're not being simulated in some kid's computer upstairs, but something equivalent to that in some sense, right? There's a level of simulation going on. There's many levels. Our product, it's in our kind of, we know about our world. We had the whole shared inner space thing, right, where it's being shared, simulated from basically Jung's collective subconscious. So it's not quite the same thing as a mechanical computer somewhere. But you could have levels of simulation. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that, and that doesn't refute a God. That just means that God's the top of that whole chain of being.
So it's not necessarily different computers simulating.
Yeah, but the whole thing is, even if there is a deeper levels to the simulation, levels of simulation, right?
Yeah. That
wouldn't refute the argument. It would just mean that and you could have there could be various gods and goddesses of sorts. Maybe that's where all these notions of pantheons came from, and there are these various characters at deeper levels or angelic powers or whatever have you. So just at these deeper levels, and they're influencing our simulation. And then the thing about it is now, of course, this is way cutting edge in a sense, but so he wouldn't have any access to this back in 2011. Because I hadn't even thought of it yet, is remember I explained how you can get Christianity out of the metaphysics itself.
Yeah.
Again, the same mechanics apply at all scales, right? It's not like it suddenly stops being true just because at this level. It's something that applies at all scales. So it wouldn't be something kind of ad hoc generated by some kid upstairs, making up a set of rules for us and having a different set of rules made up by his programmer and so on.
I'll be back in 1 minute.
It's a generic set of rules that applies to all levels. All right.
Nor does it make sense that as virtual beings we would be subject to any of that God's rules or participate in any afterlife. All right, then what about God necessarily being omnipresent, all-loving, perfectly moral, and perfectly benevolent? Well, they're all contingent on his being all-knowing. which, as mentioned earlier, would be logically impossible for a timeless, changeless being. But even without that problem, would it make sense to you?
It is so funny how his sense of the possible is so utterly, like, tiny.
Yeah, it's pretty ad hoc, the whole video. In
I
my
mean,
opinion.
even I can show what's wrong with that now with our current understanding. Like, his whole way of arguing about this stuff is just so limited. Like, that's the one thing I keep noticing over and over again is he's putting all these constraints on things where there's no need for these constraints to be there.
All right, I'm back.
Yeah, and all this stuff's basically been turned on its head already by idealism.
Yeah.
The claim that the God of the Bible is all-loving, perfectly moral, and perfectly benevolent. First, love is an emotion, and emotions are biochemically driven responses to stimuli which guide behavior to increase an individual's ability to survive and reproduce. Emotions only make sense in the context of a being that must interact with others and live in a hazardous environment. Yet the Bible...
No, that doesn't... It's so stupid to say. I mean, the whole quantum cognition thing shuts that whole thing down, you know?
Yeah.
Yes, chemicals affect this because they are affecting the quantum biology. They're affecting, well, the neural patterns in our brain, which in turn are affecting probably some quantum biological traits in our brain. The emotions themselves are not dependent. They're things that exist in the wave function.
He's assuming materialism.
He's just assuming it's such a like naively, like, oh my,
A naive materialism?
so tiny.
Oh, you smart that.
It literally reminds me of those. You know those Men in Black movies. Either the first one, actually, they have like in the same in like all the Men in Black movies, where at the very end of the movie, they think they're in the top level, right? They found like the little marble or the little aliens that live in the locker.
Yeah.
And then at the end, it turns out that we're inside of someone else's locker, and our universe is under marble in someone else's universe, and so on. You know.
Yeah.
Like, that's literally what his thinking is literally like one of the people in the marble or in the locker. Like, it's kind of quaint, actually, to be honest.
Well, he's assuming, like, never mind.
Yeah, his frame of thinking is so tiny. That's what I was getting at.
God as a highly emotional being, full of anger, love, jealousy, spite, disgust, regret, pride, and other emotions. What possible use would an immaterial, original being have for any emotions? They would be as pointless as lust is to a eunuch. This would imply one of two things. Either God is one of many gods, or he doesn't possess any.
Okay, the Trinity refutes that argument automatically.
Whatever.
Oh yeah, that's the beautiful thing is that applies at the deepest level of simulation. That's the universal. Like, the whole notion of the Trinity being derived comes from the semantic Trinity, which means any levels of simulation with any level of complexity below, you know, it relies on the whole semantic Trinity concept, which has to do with all that complexity being collapsed.
Yeah.
Even if we pick it out of an idealist context, still, I mean, the whole notion, like, the semantic thing is going to apply to any. So you can even do a dualist God and so on, and it's or a non-descript God.
Even without idealism, that whole argument just doesn't even work.
Yeah,
by the fact of the Trinity. So.
The Trinity comes out of the semantic Trinity, which is due to the complexity necessarily collapsing down to its minimum possible level size, which has to do with, you know, all those other supposed gods just disappear.
Oh yeah.
Absorb the semantics at lower levels. You know, before you get to that level of like that perfectly integrated triad. Like semantic logic conclusion, you know.
Yeah.
All right.
Evidence is there that God is all-loving, perfectly moral, and perfectly benevolent. Theists will sometimes claim that the fact that goodness exists means there must be a maximum goodness, which is God. But using that same logic, one can say that because evil exists, there must be a maximum evil, which is God. To get around this, theists will often argue that evil doesn't exist, that it is merely an absence of good, much like darkness is an absence of light, or that cold is an absence of heat, as if physical laws are somehow analogous to morality. However, that is merely baseless assertion, since a person who is incapable of doing good would not necessarily have to commit evil acts, but could instead behave in a neutral manner. But even if morality were analogous to physics, just as easily claim that good is the absence of evil. And evil is exactly how the Bible portrays God's behavior.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Well, the privatio
the
boni.
whole notion of how privatio boni is derived in the first place starts. It has to do with grounding objective morality on first you get idealism. That's pretty much established at this point. Unless you're living in a unless you're in denial or you're living in ignorance somewhere.
Yeah.
You don't have the internet basically. So either once you got idealism, you can then demonstrate universal intersubjectivity of the top mind, aka God. That universal intersubjectivity is in turn how you get any kind. Otherwise it's all just subjective. It's just will to power. Subjective versus another person. If there's no such thing as universally intersubjective, right?
Yeah.
So therefore, God is, because he happens to have this universally intersubjective frame, he is by definition good. Therefore, all of his actions are motivated by good. Therefore, everything he produces is good. Therefore, evils. So once you understand how privatio boni is derived, you have to have good existing before evil existing. You can't.
You'll see. He tries to make the case that God is evil, which you'll see. But
yeah, I know, and that's yeah.
He condones or commits murder and genocide, animal and human sacrifice, torture, child abuse, animal abuse, theft, slavery, pedophilia, rape, incest, cannibalism, betrayal, lying, the very behaviors we ourselves use to identify evil persons. In fact, I have a whole video series which
okay, stop.
If God exists.
Stop.
That
I refuted his entire I did a blog.
That notion I think is what's driving him to make all these other arguments, to be honest. Is the notion of driving evil.
And what's funny is that I did a full-blown refutation of his video series.
It's very
on my
easy.
blog.
You can refute it, but at the same time, there's my experience is that you guys kind of saw that happening. What was going on? It's easy to conceive of how people at an existential level start to think of God as evil. I think it's got to be based on and that's what's driving all this atheism in the first place, to be honest. People wouldn't be doing that if they saw God as good in a way they could directly conceive as good.
So underlinks for the viewers. I did a whole refutation of his video series. So,
all right.
He is necessarily evil, so there's no need for me to provide that detail here. Suffice to say that there is far more scriptural and observable evidence that God is evil rather than good. Thus, point 4 of the Kalam cosmological argument should actually read, even if there weren't any scientific explanations to account for the cause of the universe, it is illogical to conclude that it must be due to a personal agent, known as God, that chose to create the universe. What about the additional points tacked on in an attempt to eliminate an infinite succession of causes? The defense for premise 5 is that a smaller subset within an actual infinite set is counterintuitive, thus actual infinites cannot exist. Unfortunately, this defense requires both appeal to intuition and begging the question fallacies. Mathematicians and logicians have no problem accepting smaller subsets within infinite sets, in both mathematics and in the real world, as this is a defining characteristic of infinite sets. For example, if set A equals all numbers and subset B equals all even numbers, both sets are infinite even though B is smaller than A. Thus, a proper restatement of premise 5 is an actual infinite can exist.
It doesn't work in the real world. That's the whole point.
Whether a successive series constitutes an actual infinite or is instead a potential infinite, although with the change to premise 5 it makes no difference either way. So a more accurate restatement of premise 6 would be a beginningless temporal series of events could be either an actual infinite or a potential infinite. Regardless, conclusion 7 should read, therefore, a beginningless temporal series of events can potentially exist. So our universe could be an oscillating series of events, or it could be part of an eternal metaverse, possessing between 1 and an infinite number of universes, or it could be a virtual world within a universe universe that has almost nothing in common with our universe. Or it could be something else. It could even be the result of a godlike entity, even though the evidence suggests otherwise. The only accurate response to the question of where our universe came from is, we don't know. However, what evidence we do have suggests a purely naturalistic explanation, and thus it is irrational to believe in a supernatural one. The problem with the Kalam cosmology...
There you go. That's that whole thing been, that frame of reference has been undermined as well, because idealism, you know, with the advent of idealism and so on, we have theistic naturalism, we have the whole natural supernatural dichotomy dissolving.
Yeah, I know. But literally, like, his whole reference, just the whole, his whole thing just doesn't work.
It's not that it makes a couple of questionable claims, but that it gets pretty much every claim wrong. This is because instead of starting with the facts and then using logic to deduce a conclusion, its proponents started with the conclusion that the God of the Bible exists, and then tried to find observations and construct logical arguments to support it. The result is a weak collection of claims that ignores equally valid observations that would result in quite different conclusions. Examples of these conveniently ignored observations include the only material entities for which we have evidence, such as physical laws, are completely powerless and mindless on their own. They can only affect the world if they are essentially used as tools by physical entities. Consciousness always develops from non-conscious entities.
No. No.
Oh my
No.
God. This presupposes like a retarded philosophy. Not only does it presuppose a philosophy of mind, it presupposes a retarded philosophy of mind.
Yeah.
I mean, the very fact that you can't reduce like colors to anything demonstrates the fundamental or quality, you know, in thoughts. So those things, like, his whole thinking is just so like
this is not
very
even
incredibly naive.
Yeah. And not only that, but like the not just like the whole foundation of the way he's thinking to make these arguments just automatically just fail. Like,
Yeah.
outright
fail. I mean, this is reminding me of like my arguments with Dorpaton in some respects. I mean, they're more varied than those, but it's the same kind of limitation on, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, I've seen the same kind of limitation with Messianic Manic as well at times in terms of how they think. Like they're just not. Their thinking is so small. Oh well. All right, keep going.
As single-celled organisms eventually evolved into beings with minds, and in an individual's life cycle, as a zygote develops into a living human being. Our sensory organs, limbs, hair, and other features are a direct result of evolution selecting traits that allow us to survive and interact with the physical world. Evolutionary theory reveals how complexity can emerge from simplicity using mindless random chance coupled with natural selection.
Yeah, that's presupposing neo-Darwinism, which is kind of dead at this point.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if IP's gonna. He said he was gonna make a argument from biology for idealism.
That I'm curious to see.
Yeah, so if he's arguing from like a purely neo-Darwinian viewpoint with regards to evolution, that's pretty much going to
I
end the
wonder
whole
if he's going to be
argument.
using Hoffman's model, Hoffman's idea, where he uses like evolutionary development to argue against realism, that our perceptions are all flawed.
Yeah, I know.
That would be cool.
That means the whole argument that underlings is using right now just automatically fails, like, from the start.
Implodes.
Yeah.
Core implosion. All right.
If someone wants to believe in the existence of God because it gives them comfort, that's fine, as long as he is aware that his belief is based on faith, not rational thought. But using the Kalam cosmological argument in order to give some rational justification for that belief means embracing a series of fallacies and factual errors, all supporting what amounts to little more than one big argument from ignorance. Observation and logic simply cannot provide a compelling argument for the existence of God. At best, they suggest a naturalistic explanation. which should come as no surprise since that's what's happened to supposed supernatural events continuously throughout history. Not once has an apparently natural event turned out to have a supernatural explanation. The fact
There's a question-begging component to that as well.
That's the naturalism of the gaps argument on top of.
Because you have supernatural events happening, and people will try and explain it away. I mean, I've shown you some of those weird experiences I've had myself. Or some of them are even explicitly veridical, and people will say that's coincidence, or, well, I'm not. That's your anecdote, etc. And then they have say they have these studies of near-death experiences. Like actually, Moreland pointed out they have like journals on this stuff, right? They publish this stuff, and they have like numerous ones, right?
Yeah.
And these are like collectives, like whole bunches of not just anecdotes. These are a whole series of carefully tabulated and recorded data, right? Accounts, and then they have that in turn published in these journals, or they get peer reviewed in those journals and so on. And they have this happens all the time, right?
Yeah.
And some of these are quite explicitly veridical and involve things that don't make any sense from a materialist point of view, or actually explicitly impossible from that.
Yeah.
And those get ignored by academia in some ways, right?
Yeah.
That kind of that materialist desire. And so what happens then is, because that gets ignored, they can then say, well, that's not accepted evidence by academia.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because you morons rejected it in the first place because it didn't fit into your materialist. It's like, we're going to put a filter on to remove any evidence, anything for supernatural stuff, and call it natural, and then complain that there's no evidence for the supernatural.
Well, it's not supernatural. Natural is more like materialism.
They're gonna. No, I'm saying they put the filter.
Oh yeah.
Filter out. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, just to conclude, he's literally just assuming materialism and then using that whole framework of materialism as an argument against the Kalam, which is just absurd.
Stupid, yeah.
There is no evidence that God or anything else supernatural exists. Period.
Consciousness.
Yeah, I know. Okay, next video is the Counter-Kalam. Now this one, he uses...
what's funny is when you bring up the whole thing of idealism and related to explanatory continuity and all that, you find that evidence, the category of evidence relies on the immaterial in the first place. You can't get, otherwise you're stuck in solipsism.
Yeah, that's true. So, it's the hilarious part.
He just shoots it all right down. What's the next one?
The Counter-Kalam. We're not going to focus on that because he uses the same. That's why I wanted to do the podcast, well, this video response with you, Johanan, because the whole framework that he uses to make these arguments against the Kalam he's literally just question-begging, naive.
Yeah.
The next video is
Counter-Kalam.
the Counter-Kalam.
All right, let's see.
Yeah, I can hear it. All right, no, okay. You can share your screen.
You want me to share it too?
Well, no, share the screen so we can see it.
Oh, sure. See this one. Last one you didn't have to see it, I don't think. Or hold on here. Where? Oh, am I? No, 1 second. Oh, I see what's wrong. Yeah, I put it on the same tab as the Google Hangouts. That's why I couldn't find it. Did that problem last time. All right. So I'll play it. Let's see. 1 second. Where'd it go again? Oh,
Share screen. Yeah, you should. Okay, I can hear it. Okay, now all you gotta do is share your screen now.
Okay. See it?
Yep. All right, we're good.
In recent years, Christian philosophers, led by William Lane Craig, have revived the Kalam cosmological argument, which they believe gives logical justification for belief in, or even proof of, the existence of God. The argument has several variations, but it basically goes like this. Everything that begins to exist has a cause of its existence. Craig considers this premise intuitively obvious based on the claim that something cannot come from nothing. The universe began to exist. This premise is based on the scientific evidence indicating that our universe began with the Big Bang 13.7 billion years ago. Therefore, the universe has a cause for its existence. This conclusion logically follows from the first two premises, assuming they're correct. Since no scientific explanation can account for the cause of the universe, it must be due to a personal agent, known as God, that chose to create the universe. Furthermore, this agent must be immaterial, timeless, spaceless, changeless, uncaused, beginningless, eternal, enormously intelligent, and enormously powerful. The arguments to support this conclusion include such claims as actual infinities cannot exist, the universe is too finely tuned to be natural, and God cannot consist of properties that didn't exist before the birth of the universe. Thus, the final conclusion is, therefore, God exists. For many theists, this is a persuasive argument for the existence of God. However, I have devised an argument similar to the Kalam that reaches somewhat different conclusions. I call it the Counter-Kalam cosmological argument, and it goes like this. Everything that begins to exist has a cause of its existence. Actually, this premise is questionable, since quantum mechanics and other theories in physics do allow for the spontaneous creation of universes essentially out of nothing.
Yeah,
No.
I refuted that one before.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, we'll deal with that again. So there is no vacuum before the Big Bang because there's no space-time to contain it before the Big Bang.
Yep.
However, any proponent of the Kalam must accept this premise, since it's identical to premise 1 of the Kalam. Every thought or action requires a change in matter over time and space before it can begin to exist.
No. Platonism itself, I mean, he has to question back nominalism there as well to pull that off. I mean, the whole notion of thoughts, the whole notion of Platonism is that there are thoughts there before we think them. Yeah, they've always existed, you know?
Yeah, he's question begging materialism. Like that's literally that's what he's doing. It's not even.
Isn't it interesting how materialism is the cause? I mean, we talked about how there could be that weird rarefied atheism, right?
But materialism is
materialism is what's causing this stuff. Like this,
yeah.
The whole materialistic spirit is the frame of thinking is what's causing all this atheism everywhere. It's
exactly.
I knew that. I intuited that way back when I started quantum idealism. Like, I can tell what's at the root of all these problems. We get rid of this one thing, it's going to like clear up everything.
Yep.
The evidence for this premise is even stronger than the evidence that the universe had a beginning, since thought and action are defined by change over time, and all our direct evidence reveals that thoughts and actions occur as a direct result of observable changes in matter. Therefore, the cause of every thought or action must be material, temporal, spatial, changeable, caused, originated, and non-eternal.
No. No. That is, he's literally assuming. Again, he's literally assuming materialism here. I mean, it's not even.
Like headbang. Like, this thing is like. I mean, okay. Quantum idealism still wasn't as popular. I mean, it was around in 2013. Actually, yeah, this is March 2. IP hadn't picked it up yet. You know.
Yeah.
I was still kind of doing my thing at the time. I didn't have, at this date. What was that? No, it was 2012. I had 1,000 subscribers as of mid 2012. I was still chugging along though. You know, I was doing okay, but it was wow. And look at the likes on this thing. 290 likes. Like, so limited in the thinking.
These conclusions logically follow because matter, time, and space began with our universe. Since the God of the Kalam cosmological argument is defined as immaterial, timeless, spaceless, changeless, uncaused, beginningless, and eternal, he must be incapable of thought or action, which by definition means he cannot be intelligent or powerful. Since the God of the Kalam possesses none of the prerequisites required for thought or action.
It's like one of those guys in the closet in the locker on Men in Black. You know, and they're having this argument how there can be nothing outside the locker, and they're like pointing to the confines of the locker to give the demonstration of it.
Mm-hmm.
and they're like speaking in that cute little squeaky voice, you know.
Yeah.
That's what this reminds me of.
Yeah, I mean, what he's, I mean,
so what are you all doing here?
like what he's like the type of materialism he's assuming is not even like, how should I? It's not like, not even the polymath would hold to this type of materialism, because I know the polymath, he's not a reductionist, so he wouldn't say that thoughts are material. He would say that, you know, thoughts are emergent, or, you know, it doesn't reduce. But I mean, this is like ridiculous. Like, he's literally assuming a hard reductionist, naive materialism.
Very naive.
So that whole argument just automatic, that doesn't even, because he's presupposing materialism.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah. Okay, you want to go to the next video, because I think we've pretty much undermined his whole argument.
Let's see if
Anyway.
there's anything after. I mean, there's like, what, 30 seconds left in the video, I think. So
Yeah.
process through this real fast.
He must be both
50
mindless and impotent. This leads to one final conclusion. Therefore, God could not have created the universe. It also makes the question of whether God exists irrelevant. And there you have it.
His whole frame,
Yeah.
his whole frame of why God couldn't be doing this is based on stuff that is only found in the physical world, in the like what's being created. Like, his whole frame of thinking is,
Yeah, I know.
oh
Yeah.
my goodness, this is so distorted. Like, and the thing about this is that this is how people would naturally think, like, prior to idealism.
Yeah. I mean, that's how I thought when I was a materialist. I mean, I wasn't like a hardcore reductionist, but I was.
You were a dualist Christian way back in the day, weren't you? Kind of like this.
No, but you remember
I'm not talking about believing you would disagree with him while you were a dualist Christian, but your frame of thinking would be in some respects similar.
Yeah.
You would have the general confines.
Yeah. So.
Set up.
And plus, at that time, I didn't understand philosophy of mind, so like, I wouldn't know how to refute that argument.
It totally burns. That was the other thing. When I started this, I noticed like the Christians, they had painted themselves behind a line. They could be like getting beat all over the place by stuff that could be very easily by just shifting ontology.
Yeah.
All right.
Using an argument similar to the Kalam, it's possible to conclude that God could not have created the universe, which ultimately makes the Kalam a more persuasive argument for atheism than it is for theism.
Yeah, if you question big materialism, yeah. But
yeah.
Stupid.
The Kalam also points out it has to be materialistic because it's outside space-time.
Yeah, I know.
Didn't even understand that. I mean.
Okay, the next argument.
Popularized then. Okay, what was the next video?
You see the one with multiple faces on it. It says proof that God did not create the universe.
Let me take a look.
It's on the side.
Yes. All right, here we go.
Hey guys, my name is Kevin
Oh, no,
Goldie. I'm
wrong
from
one.
Chicago.
Proof
Wrong one.
that God did not create the universe.
I think I fixed things, by the way.
Okay, it's fine. Tim, we're the next video is gonna be very short, so we're gonna need you for the historicity part.
Yeah, I'm not really on that history stuff.
Cool.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
Tim, that's why we have Tim here.
$1 billion worth of cryptocurrencies out there, but there's
That's the wrong video.
$2 billion of demand.
All right.
Okay.
Is it shared?
No, I can hear it though.
Let me share it real fast.
Okay, we got it.
A cosmological argument is a method of argumentation that uses observations about our universe to infer the existence of a first cause responsible for creating the universe, which theists claim is God. Various cosmological arguments exist, the most popular being the Kalam cosmological argument. I've argued against the Kalam in 2 previous videos. pointing out its numerous flaws and showing how a timeless, spaceless being would be incapable of thinking or acting to create a universe. In this video, I will use the same method of argumentation used in the Kalam to construct an even stronger proof that God could not have created our universe. I call this argument the godless cosmological argument. First, a general recap of the Kalam cosmological argument. Everything that begins to exist has a cause of its existence. Many theists consider this intuitively obvious, based on the law of causality. The universe began to exist, based on evidence that time, space, and matter came into existence 13.8 billion years ago. Therefore, the universe has a cause for its existence. This logically follows, assuming premises 1 and 2 are correct. Since no scientific explanation can account for the cause of the universe, it must be due to a personal agent, known as God, that chose to create the universe. Furthermore, God must be immaterial, timeless, spaceless, changeless, uncaused, beginningless, eternal, enormously intelligent, and enormously powerful, based on the assumption that this personal agent existed before time, space, and matter came into existence, and that creating a universe must require great power and intelligence. My godless cosmological argument goes like this. Complexity always originates from a simpler, earlier state. I call this the law of complex origins. As with causality, there are no known exceptions to this law.
Yeah, there is universal wave function. We got that before. There's other thing. It's not even like, I mean, it is God is before the universe, right? In a sense, but when you go from God's frame, it's not even that it's a matter of before or after, because it's just outside time. It's eternally not eternally in a temporal sense, but in an extratemporal sense. There, you know.
Yeah, even on a dualist account, that would still be true. So.
Yeah. Timelessly looking down at, you know, unless you're William Lane Craig or one of his acolytes, because they always like A theory. You forgot.
Yeah.
So. All right.
Mind is a complex system, arguably the most complex system known to science. God has an intelligent, possibly even omniscient mind. This is a basic premise of virtually all theologies, especially those that use cosmological arguments to prove the existence of God. Therefore, God must have evolved from a simpler, earlier state. Although many theists claim that God is constructed from a single, simple substance, an intelligent mind is enormously more complex than no mind at all, and an omniscient mind would arguably be the most complex system possible. Since God existed in a simpler, earlier state, he cannot be changeless, eternal, and timeless by definition. Furthermore, it means that he couldn't have existed before time came into existence, which means he had to have a beginning, and thus he cannot be the first cause.
Yeah, that's kind of question, baby.
And if time began with the formation of...
Wait a minute. It's got to exist in a simpler... Oh, we are to what equation is maximally complex, yet it exists, you know...
Before anything
outside
else.
of time, it just exists. Like, period. Atemporally. Not even before time. I mean, yes, before time as well, but it's just...
The wave function. Yeah, the wave function.
Yeah. All right.
Our universe, as evidence suggests, God could not have created our universe. So there you have it. Proof that God was not the creator of our universe. Of course, the godless cosmological argument is completely specious because it extends the law of complex origins to before the birth of our universe, the one place that lacks the time, space, and energy where we observe the law of complex origins occurring. But then the same is true for the law of causality. We also observe it only occurring within the context of time, space, and energy.
Yeah.
Claiming causality applies before the birth of our universe is also specious.
Okay, that I will have to a tiny bit agree with him there, and William Lane Craig kind of parts that in, but it's not really a big thing, though. I mean, yes, the universe wasn't actually quote-unquote caused in the same way, but it's really kind of besides the point, because there's still a sense you can speak of causation.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you go back to the Big Bang,
God, it's contingent on God. God is the contingent explanation for it, even though causality as such is not there before. Now, William Lane Craig likes to do that, kind of insists on that anyway, for whatever reason. I guess aesthetics or something, and kind of mingles his physics in the process, but that is what it is.
Yeah.
All right.
So this leaves theists with a conundrum. If they're going to claim that the law of causality applies beyond the limits of our universe, then they must accept that the equally intuitively obvious law of complex origins also applies, and thus God logically cannot be the creator of our universe. But if they claim that neither the law of causality nor the law of complex origins applies beyond the limits of our universe, then that invalidates the first premise of the Kalam cosmological argument, thus invalidating the whole argument. So either God did not create our universe, or the most commonly used argument that God created our universe is invalid. Either way, the Kalam cosmological argument fails.
So he tries to say that since the law of simplicity doesn't have, would it apply beyond our? I guess we wouldn't really know.
Well, it doesn't matter, doesn't, because the whole thing it's only this just temporal. He's thinking in this space-time context.
Yeah,
and then when you get apply there anymore outside the universe.
And then when you get, so in a way, I'd have to think about that, the whole, because that does kind of, I guess the best way to say it is that we have all the evidence supports the fact that everything that begins to exist has a cause.
What is interesting, though, with the exception of his bringing his presupposing things about the mind and so on,
yeah,
it's much easier to see why materialism is false of the mind now, false idealism, right? But it's so fascinating to see how, with what we know now, how easy this stuff is to refute.
I know, because it just undermines the whole.
Yeah, and the thing about this is, it almost makes me think of, in the future, atheism. The way atheism is going to be seen is like a museum relic, like these, way back when they believed the Earth was flat, or the Earth was the center of the universe, or etc.
It was just
little period. There's this little historical period of time, and and all these and then you pull up these arguments, and they're like, oh, haha, I see why that's false,
Yeah.
And it's just so intuitive.
Well, it is true. In academia, even back then, they were biased toward, a flat Earth or the Earth being the center.
Yeah.
Of the universe.
Yeah, they're just so tiny. Their thinking is so tiny, and it's so easy to see how wrong all this stuff is because it's just well, duh.
Yeah.
And
because once you get rid of matter, that's it. It's game over.
Yeah,
the whole.
Yeah, it's so fascinating to see all those arguments that are so limited in their scope, and it's so easy to see how they're wrong.
Not just arguing against them, having a critique of the argument, but literally refuting the very foundation for which their arguments are based on.
Yeah, and the thing is, he's not the only atheist making arguments of this variety. This is a very common thing to see.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Now, also of interesting of note is that a lot of Christian, with the exception of his metaphysics and the way he's treating the mind and so on, and the nature of Platonic objects and etc., and
yeah,
complexity and so on. There's a lot of Christians who would, in some respects, fall into his same categories of thinking prior to deal. And so it's very simple to see how this, the entire. The Christian side was the correct side, but the framing of this was very limited in scope.
So it's
this is
the atheists and the Christians in some way are using the same framework, just in different ways.
Totally. When you move that take out that framework and pop them up a level, show them where the marble they're inside of, or the closet they're inside of. it's so easy. Like, oh, duh, of course.
Yeah.
You know.
And that's the beauty. I mean, that's the beauty. Like I've seen a lot of atheists like use that framework to argue against God. Like for example, I'll see them say that, well, since God is everything that they'll say that first everything that exists is made of matter energy. God is not made of matter energy, therefore God doesn't exist. Like they'll just assume that.
Oh yeah, I've seen it all over the place. So I think what this is it's yeah, they do that all the time, and then they get all then they complain about they basically won't even engage our arguments when we sometimes they will, sometimes it'll shock them, but a lot of them will. They don't even want it. They realize that if they even begin engaging on our frame, I think at some level, like subconsciously, they're going to lose, like automatically.
Yeah.
And so they have to find some way to restrict the frame. They're afraid of our frame, and they'll just reject it. They'll call it woo for no reason, even though we have actual scientists on this and so on. Yeah, their whole frame of thing. They'll find like absurd like word games to try and get out of it, twist out of it. Now, what would be really fascinating to see is I've seen a lot of Christians haven't picked up on this yet. You know what I'm saying?
If all Christians started arguing like that, oh god, that would be.
Imagine what would happen overnight.
That would be like, you know how the atheists, they always like if you go on YouTube atheists, they'll argue, they'll like just destroy creationists, right? Like automatically.
Yeah.
It would be like it'll be the Christians destroying the atheists
in the same way.
Yeah.
But for that, we gotta get the Christians off the creationist kind of arguments, and even off some of the classical apologetics kind of arguments. I mean,
yeah,
they're much better than the creationist arguments. Like it's better, but they're still very limited in terms of this framework. Yeah. And once they do that, it's gonna once we get this popular in mainstream Christian circles, this is just gonna blow up.
Yeah. So to conclude our critique of underlinks with regard to the Kalam, his whole reference frame for his argument is just that whole idea of materialism and how he treats the mind just automatically does not work.
That was the one thing that kept coming back to me over and over again was how tiny this was.
Yeah. And that's what he did essentially. So.
It's like a debate of two Ptolemaists, like heliocentrism can't possibly be true of it. Like, see, in a way it was, I mean, imagine there was some prototype to heliocentrism, right? But it was still arguing a very limited frame.
Yeah.
This almost reminds me, this kind of thing, once this becomes popular, this whole way of thinking is going to be seen as just this historical artifact.
Yeah. All right, Tim. All right, we gotta move on. So the next video is the last one.
Can everybody hear me all right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You want to play this one, Timothy?
So, did Jesus exist? You sharing that one, right, Johan?
Hold on. Oh, wrong one.
That's the next one.
Yeah, I mixed up the links on which one's which. You want to share this one, Timothy?
I think so. If I can get the link.
Okay, I'm going to put the link in the
It's the Did Jesus Exist video. That's the video.
Yeah, I'm putting it on the Christian Idealism chat again.
Yeah.
All right, there you go.
Okay. All right.
You got it?
Yeah, I've got it. I'm trying to stop the ad and stuff.
Oh, I see. All right.
Okay.
No, my turn to learn something. I got a historical apologetics is not my area, so it's always nice to hear stuff about this. All right.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen in a second. Here. Okay. Just a second.
It just reminds me that we really need to start spreading this idealism around, like in a larger scale in YouTube, like websites
Okay.
and getting people to do programs and stuff on this because it's like apologetics classes. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
'Cause this thing there's a lot of mess we have to mop up still.
All right, let's
All right.
critique this next one.
Yep.
Did Jesus exist? I would say, of course he did. So much has been written about him after all. And so many people around the world believe he existed. And as you might expect, most biblical scholars at least agree that someone named Jesus probably existed in ancient Rome and that he was killed by the government. However, despite being such a purportedly significant historical figure, the evidence for his existence is remarkably weak. Characters of the ancient world, like Julius Caesar and Alexander the Great, were written about extensively during their lives.
All right, so I see the first problem here in that Jesus is being compared to ruling officials, a Jewish rabbi who was crucified, which would have been seen as a very shameful thing and thus wouldn't have been mentioned in principle by the vast majority of historians. Doesn't seem like a good comparison to people like Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar, as in those cases, we would expect everyone to know about them, while in this case, you've only got one small section of the Roman Empire, and within that section, most people wouldn't want to mention him in the first place, of the fact that crucifixion would have been seen as so shameful that it would have been seen as giving Christianity credence to even mention it because of all these failed Messiah movements that were going on.
Both by their allies and by their enemies.
Oh, I guess I would also ask underlings what actual historians from the period that he would expect to mention Jesus that didn't. Like, would he expect that Philo would have mentioned Jesus or Suetonius or someone else? Because in reality, we don't have much from the ancient world. And
Yeah,
can everybody hear me right?
Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you good. And
Oh,
I want to
shoot.
also add, there's a lot, like,
Oh my gosh.
there's more evidence for Jesus than Julius Caesar. Is there? I mean, that's kind of what I heard. I don't know if that's necessarily true, but I know with regards to the standard of evidence that they use for that time period, there's more evidence for Jesus than there is for anyone else living during that period. Do you think that's, I mean, would that be valid, Tim? Would you agree with that? Oh, sorry guys, Tim's mic thing broke. Just give it a second to fix it. Okay, I can hear you. Can you hear me? Tim, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
All right, I guess we'll just keep on going here, even though I can't hear it. Yeah, can you type in the chat, Kyle, if you can hear me or not right now? Okay. Well, okay. So that wasn't a problem. Great. I guess I'll continue. Maybe if I... Okay.
Also appeared in many official documents and on coins. Their actions had immediate and dramatic consequences for this. Not so with Jesus. Despite his supposedly being involved with major events that would have rocked the ancient world.
Actually, these events would not have rocked the ancient world. Let's concede that they would have rocked the ancient world in the same way that the destruction of the Jerusalem temple and the destruction of Jerusalem would have shake the ancient world. That was only mentioned by Josephus. That was first mentioned by Josephus. And that's really the only good source we have for such an event. And no one doubts that event. And with regards to the Jesus movement, we've got extremely early sources, and to dismiss them as being... Oh, I got to share my screen. Yep. And to dismiss them as being biased or Christian is to really throw out all of ancient history, because everyone in ancient history wrote with some sort of bias. So it is extremely special pleading to say that, well, you can't appeal to Christian sources because they would, in principle, be someone who would believe this stuff. Because the problem with that, another problem with that is, if someone didn't believe in this stuff, why would they report that Jesus rose from the dead? If you reported that Jesus rose from the dead, then you would, in fact, be attesting to the fact that you believed such a thing. And we do have ancient enemy testimony preserved in Tertullian's counter to Celsus, who is an early Christian critic of this early 2nd century. And he fully would agree that Jesus existed and that Jesus did deeds that were regarded as miracles, and his followers believed that he rose from the dead. So in addition to all the Christian evidence, which he'll get to in a minute here, we do have stuff like that as well. So the amount of evidence is perfectly what we'd expect from someone who is a rabbi who then had a large following around him, and then grew that following to where people like Tacitus and Josephus would mention him in an offhand sort of thing. And then later we would get all the other Christian sources.
There is no direct, independent evidence that Jesus even existed. The only original accounts of his life can be found in the 4 Gospels and Pauline epistles. However, the Gospels were written by completely anonymous sources.
It depends on what you mean by completely anonymous. And so, in a formally anonymous way, no, they certainly weren't, because a formally anonymous thing would mean that we had no idea who wrote them. Are they informally anonymous, as in the writer doesn't specifically mention within the work who wrote it? Yeah, that's the case for pretty much all of ancient history. You can point to any ancient historian with very few exceptions, and they don't mention themselves writing within the book, at least in terms of biographies. So it is utterly unsurprising that we don't have the gospel authors specifically mention themselves within the within their books. However, we have an interesting case in... Okay, I'm just making sure that everything is fine.
Yeah,
if something goes wrong, just type it in the chat here.
Can you hear me?
We do have an interesting case in especially Mark, where scholars such as Richard Bauckham have argued for an inclusio that shows that Peter was indeed behind the gospel. That when Peter was first mentioned and when Peter was last mentioned sort of indicate, like in many other biographical works, such as some of Plutarch's biographies, that this was their testimony, that the first time you mention them and then the last time, in sort of a bookend, in sort of a sandwiched narrative, would be a testimony to them being the sources behind it. So in that sense, we do have the Gospels aren't even formally anonymous. Now, are they informally anonymous? No, because we do know who wrote them because of pretty early patristic writings. We have people like Papias, who wrote at the latest at 125, who provide some very useful information on the sources of the Gospels. The interesting thing here is he doesn't say that, oh, I knew the apostle Peter, or I knew this disciple or this disciple. He appeals to the elder John, that he got his information from the elder John, who was a disciple but not one of the 12. So if Papias is telling the truth, and there's good reason to believe that he is, because he's not appealing to the major disciples, as well as a number of other reasons that people like Balcom have pointed out. He mentions Peter being the source, the main source behind Mark. You have Matthew being the source of Matthew, though that's under contention given that Papias mentions a Hebrew book that was written by Matthew. And then we have early sources for the writing of John, such as writings preserved from Polycarp, Irenaeus, and Polycrates. So we do have very early evidence from the early church fathers of who wrote the books. And you can't say that, oh, these are Christian sources, and you have to discount these, because these were the people who would have been in the place to know who would have wrote the Gospels. The disciples of the disciples would have been the people to know who wrote these works. So to ignore the early patristic evidence and to ignore internal evidence, such as what I mentioned in Mark and Matthew, has the very characteristics of being written by someone like a tax collector, because it was written seemingly with a very Jewish audience in mind. Being from the priestly tribe of Levi, Matthew would have been very interested in the Jewish literature, and the monetary references in Matthew are consistent with Matthew being a tax collector as well. So we do no, I can't hear anything anybody is saying. I hope everyone can hear me. Can you hear me? Okay. Well, I guess you're gonna have to
Yeah.
communicate through the chat, because I can't hear anything. Cool. So yeah, the monetary references in Matthew, I think that it covers those. And then, oh yeah, all the early patristic evidence indicates the authorship of the Gospels. So to say that they're anonymous and just say it like that, just with one saying, parroting Ehrman, is just not going to cut it when we have all the evidence that we do have. I haven't even mentioned early quotations of the Gospels from the early church fathers, which show that they would have been seen as authoritative, and they would have cared about the historical information within them. So let's continue.
Decades after Jesus supposedly lived, and the epistles make no mention of any earthly human.
Okay, here we go with the sort of Richard Carrier, Earl Doherty argument that Paul doesn't actually mention the life of Jesus in any significant way other than him being a celestial Christ. So there's two huge problems with this. But I guess three huge problems with this. First, Paul is writing epistles to Christian churches. He is not going to mention events like the virgin birth or the miracles of Jesus in the same way that in a sermon today, a pastor isn't going to always mention these things, because everyone knew about these things, and it wasn't the purpose of Paul's epistles to give a biographical account. Second, this was written in a high context society, and in a high context society, it would be like we live in low context society where we have to give meanings and definitions around all the things that we say to most people. But a high context society would be like an inner group of friends who are in on each other's lingo and stuff, that you start to tell a joke and then people already are laughing because they know the punchline. Like they understand, they already understand the context of where you're coming from. So in the New Testament, society. That's what we would have been seeing. It would have been a high context society. So people would have already known about things like the virgin birth or the miracles of Jesus or whatever earthly events that you want to talk about. And third, we do have plenty of references to the okay, good. Made the point. I was just going to say we have many references to events such as the crucifixion in Paul, 1 Corinthians 15, 1 Corinthians 11, and the birth of Jesus, Romans 1:3, and Galatians 4:4.
And Jesus. Later gospel writers also copied material directly from earlier gospels.
Okay, this is pretty, even if true, it doesn't discount their historical reliability because of the eyewitness testimony contained therein, but the whole redaction critical element, I guess I'll keep that there. The whole redaction criticism element is pretty anachronistic given the oral culture. It wouldn't have been like someone was sitting down and it was like Matthew was sitting down and had a copy of Mark in front of him. In an oral culture, it would have been seen as plagiarism. I'll just say this to make it short. Plagiarism wasn't a thing, and this is documented by the cultural studies.
The oldest surviving copies of their works are translations of translations written hundreds of years later. And the word
translations of translations, and we can just look at the Greek manuscripts and translate it right from there. And that's not a problem. And if he's going to complain about
that
the
old anyway.
manuscript
They're
tradition,
not hundreds of years. Like
we can complain about the manuscript tradition of all ancient documents. And he doesn't want to do that. Therefore,
he just said something that wasn't true though. Like, the Gospels are not that
he has
old.
no point.
I mean, they weren't written hundreds of years after
in
that.
every copy contains alterations.
The types of textual variants that we are seeing at this point are. Oh, yeah, I can't hear anything. Sorry. If Johan, type it in the chat. If it's, yeah, I can't hear. Feel so alone. I'll just wait a second and then keep going. If I guess I'll make the quick point about textual alterations. Okay. Well, right. That's right. Exactly. They were written in the 1st century. We have early 2nd century fragments. And that dismisses, he was appealing to the whole Constantine idea that everything was rewritten probably in the 4th century, which is just an internet myth. And you can't support that on a textual basis. You have to literally deny the paleographers that have dated the manuscripts to earlier than this. So, yeah. And the textual variations that we do see within the manuscripts are extremely, extremely minute. And the textual variations that we see in places like the long ending of Mark, we already understand where those went in, why they went in, and that they weren't in the originals. So him ignoring the whole study of textual criticism and just saying, oh, there's a bunch of copies, they have differences, therefore we can't know anything about it, is just a silly argument. I'm going to play this at maybe
Finally, none of the
1.5 speed.
Eyewitness accounts to begin with.
Wrong.
All
Okay.
these issues are serious red flags for scholars.
That would be incorrect. That they don't claim to be eyewitness accounts. Luke claimed to get his information from eyewitnesses in the prologue of Luke. Matthew doesn't say. John says it was written by the beloved disciple. And Mark, if the inclusio argument that I mentioned about Peter being mentioned would be against it anyway. And most eyewitness accounts don't claim to be written by eyewitnesses because why would they claim something that they were like they don't mention themselves within the works, so it's completely expected with an ancient biography.
Seeking to validate historical claims. But even if those problems didn't exist, the Gospels and epistles were written by Christians eager to promote Christianity.
Absolutely. So that's actually an argument for for them being concerned about the historical information, because if they were so if they were so fixed on Jesus and the tradition around it, and we see from people like Papias that the earliest Christians were indeed concerned with what the disciples, with the original eyewitnesses had to say, that they wouldn't take the word of the community. They would be looking at what the specified teachers were saying, the individual teachers were saying, like the disciples. It shows that they had a very unique interest. The Christians were the first. Yeah, that's exactly true as well. I don't even think Celsus criticized the Gospels authorship. So yeah, it's not like all the non-Christians were all of like we're saying in the 1st and 2nd century, we don't know who wrote these, we don't know who wrote these, we don't know who wrote these. Yeah, the evidence is pretty clear from the beginning that most everyone within the early Christian community knew who wrote these works.
Thus cannot be considered.
Oh yeah, the unbiased thing. Bias has absolutely no correlation to truth. I would think that a Jew writing about the Holocaust, who had a special interest in talking about the horrors of it, so it didn't happen again, would be giving even more reliable information. So it's not an argument against their reliability. And they're just trying to discount these sources so that they can say we don't have any sources for the historical Jesus. And I mean, that sort of argument just doesn't cut it within academia. No one within the scholarship of early Christianity would say, oh, these are Gospels, let's throw them out, they're biased. That's not how it works. I'm going to play this at 1.5 speed. If this stupid thing clicks, okay. Yeah, all history is biased.
Independent, unbiased sources. The only independent evidence within 100 years of when Jesus was supposed to have lived is a couple of short passages from historians Tacitus and Josephus. But they were both born years after Jesus supposedly died.
And pretty much everything Tacitus.
Furthermore, Tacitus only wrote a brief offhand comment and made no claims as to the historicity of Jesus. And almost scholars
I'm trying to pause it. Stop.
Was altered by Christian scribes who fit the Christian narrative.
Stupid video. Pause.
Neither historian's writings provide credible evidence for the
Okay. He said a lot there. And I wasn't able to pause it. So, first on Tacitus. He says that, well, Tacitus wrote after Jesus. Well, most of what Tacitus is writing about is after Tacitus was born. What was about before Tacitus was born. So, and Tacitus is regarded as one of the most reliable of ancient historians. So to say that, oh, Tacitus was writing about things afterwards is once again special pleading against the Jesus movement, because you aren't discounting all these other historical events. You're just discounting the gospel events. Most of what we have from ancient history wasn't written by contemporaries of the event. It's not a problem. And in this case, we're not talking about 300 years after, which is when we get our most reliable biography of Alexander the Great, for example. We're talking about decades later. And then okay. So I am okay. Good. Yeah, and then he says the thing about Tacitus mentions it offhand. Tacitus literally says Jesus was crucified. He certainly mentions the existence of Jesus. So I find it very revealing that Underlings isn't actually providing like documentation for any of these things. He's just providing broad generalizations, because when you actually look into them, they're verifiably false.
Existence of Jesus. And then there are the historical inconsistencies within the Bible itself. According to the Gospel of Luke, Jesus was born in the year of a universal tax census, which started in 6 CE while Quirinius was governor of Syria. But Matthew claims Jesus was born during the reign of Herod the Great, which ended in 4 BCE. Since Quirinius' reign started 10 years after Herod's death, Jesus could not have been born during the reigns of both Herod and Quirinius. Not only that, but apparently Roman records reveal that the first universal census didn't actually occur until the reign of Emperor Vespasian in 74.
So once again, we're not talking about universal census. Okay, make this 1.5. Okay, well, it actually isn't a universal census. I'm not going to pull up the Greek right now, but it. How do I explain this easily? It isn't a universal census that is being talked about here. It's a local census, and a number of historians have shown that Quirinius was ruler twice, and that explains how the inconsistency is there. But even if we have the inconsistency, let's just say that there is the inconsistency here, because I think that this is the most credible and case that you can make against the historical reliability of the Gospels would be something like this. It does not discount the work as a whole, because a discounting of one event, certainly you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And many historical sources we have from the ancient world get one event wrong or a couple events wrong, and it's completely fine. And we trust those sources completely. And in the case of Luke, where we have Luke, who is the author of Acts, and Acts gets dozens and dozens of geographical references and stuff right, I find it hard to believe, and he gets the names of the rulers and when they're ruling correctly, that Luke wouldn't know when this census took place, or if this, or who was ruling, seems to be quite a stretch. And there's a lot of literature out there. Glenn Miller is especially doing Luke is an extremely reliable source in the first place. So historians, in most cases, would give someone like that the benefit of the doubt, especially when there is conflicting data around it. And people like Glenn Miller on Christian Think Tank have made a very compelling case that we are dealing with two different censuses that are being talked about, with the first one that he mentions and then the one mentioned in the Gospels. So it's such a non-issue that putting your whole case on this is rather weak.
4 CE, which was decades after Quirinius' reign. So the story of Jesus.
At first,
right from the very beginning.
Quirinius reigned twice. That's relatively uncontroversial, as I understand it today. That he reigned once, but when this was happening and once afterwards, that it sounds like crank harmonization, but it is pretty well established. I think Josephus mentioned something somewhere about this. Not the census, but Quirinius. I'll have to look that up later. I'll probably put it in the comment section of this video. But yeah.
The Gospel of Matthew claims that King Herod had every infant boy in the region.
Okay, this is...
Yet not a single historian of that period even mentioned such a mass murder, even though there would have been widespread outrage. And this includes the historian Josephus, who hated King Herod and made a point of recording.
Okay, actually Josephus didn't make a point of recording all the evils King Herod had done. All he said was King Herod did all these many evils. And the thing about Herod is that he killed so many people. And to refer to all of them, Josephus records a number of them, but to record all of them, all the people that he killed in all these different, for all these different reasons, we shouldn't expect it. And he even says King Herod killed so many people that it can't even be mentioned in, like, I'm obviously paraphrasing here, but he basically says that King Herod killed such a ridiculous amount of people. And so the fact that he doesn't mention this event that is recorded in the Gospels, which presupposes the unreliability of the Gospels. Where am I going with this? The fact that Josephus doesn't mention this isn't really that big of a problem, because one, we don't know how big of a killing this is in the Gospels. It doesn't say how many people were killed. It doesn't say if a dozen people were killed. It doesn't say if 30 children were killed or 50 children were killed. Herod did so many evil things within his time. It would be like during the Holocaust if one Jewish newspaper afterwards didn't talk about one of the death camps and one event in one of the death camps. So many bad things were taking place that it's unsurprising that a small event like this wouldn't have been mentioned.
Recording all of his offenses. Matthew also says that Jesus gave numerous sermons to many thousands of people throughout Judea, astounding everyone with his teachings and amazing miracles of healing and raising the dead. His fame spread far and wide, and he even performed miracles for various important leaders in the region. And yet there is no record of any of this until the Gospels were written many decades later.
Well, it's not, okay, first of all, it's not like someone just decided to write the Gospels down. Everyone acknowledges that there was definitely oral preaching before this, and there was probably some written tradition before this in the case of a Hebraic Gospel from Matthew or something like that. Supposing that the Gospels is really like someone decided, oh, gee, I'm going to talk about Jesus, and I wouldn't use Kyle, I wouldn't use the word oral traditions. I would use the word oral. It was still oral history at this point because oral traditions would imply that the disciples were dead, that the original eyewitnesses were dead. So we're talking about oral histories and oral creeds. So, yeah, that's the terminology I'd use. It's a little bit of a technical thing, but there is a distinction there. So, yeah, I guess I'll continue.
Also, Jesus supposedly rode into Jerusalem and was greeted with a parade and citywide celebration for him as the miracle-working king of the Jews. Romans normally just executed rebels without due process, yet for some reason Jesus received a high-profile trial involving important leaders and celebrities, including the Jewish high.
Because of the circumstances surrounding it, given that he was an extremely possible leader and Pilate was around and it was Passover time, and in order not to start a riot, there was a due process taken. Given that things could spill over, it was in a Jewish festival, things could have spilled over really, really, really quickly. So to not appease the Jews here, and that really it would be not a good thing. And the Jewish leaders were accusing Jesus of blasphemy, and the Romans, as we see in the Gospels, you could claim to be the Messiah all you wanted, and Jesus was claiming to be the Messiah. He wasn't actually inciting any violence, so the Romans wouldn't have any need to crucify him. So being such a high-profile person, being arrested then by the Jewish leaders who hired the Roman soldiers to do it, I think a trial would have been pretty necessary, given that they couldn't find a crime with Jesus, and they had to get the blasphemy out of him. J.P. Holding, by the way, wrote a really, 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 really good article on the historicity of the trial of Jesus.
High priest, Pontius Pilate, and even King Herod himself. Jesus also had thousands of his own supporters, including such high-ranking leaders as a royal official, a centurion, a temple leader, and members of the Jewish ruling council. Yet nobody recorded any of this. There are even disagreements in the Gospels.
Who would have recorded this? I would really be interested in who he thinks would have recorded this, because your only argument would be from Philo, and the fact that Philo doesn't mention it makes perfect sense, given that this was an honor-shame society, and that mentioning this would have been not mentioning this would have been an offhand slap to Christians and their silly movement. So, because one historian doesn't mention it, who really would have been the only one who really could have even mentioned these things, makes perfect sense. So, I think he's placing way too much faith in the amount of literature in the ancient world. We don't have hardly anything from the ancient world. I mean, Herod the Great had a secretary who was Nicholas of Damascus, and he wrote a universal history of 144 books. None of it has survived. And people like Livy wrote books, and most of Tacitus's works have been destroyed. Most of the literature in the ancient world has been destroyed. They knew the story well. Only the gospel writers would have mentioned it. Right, and the fact that we have the gospel writers, only the gospel writers mentioning it is fine, because if we can show that the gospels are sources written by eyewitnesses, as I talked about earlier in the video, earlier in this video, it isn't a problem at all.
According to Mark, Matthew, and Luke, Jesus died at 3 p.m. on the afternoon of Passover. But John claims that Jesus died on the preparation day of the Passover, which is
Actually, that isn't quite what John says. Let me pull up John 18 on my phone here. I'm just going to pull this up for a second, because John says that on the day of preparation. Let's just put our thumbs here. Okay. So John doesn't say that it was the day of preparation for the Passover. John actually says in John 18 that it was the day of preparation of Passover. I think as in the Greek is of. Yeah, of. And we've got Mark 15:42. He says, and when evening had come, since it was the day of preparation, that is, the day before the Passover. I mean, the day before the Sabbath. So preparation means preparation for the Sabbath, and there is no contradiction. It is a misreading of the text.
which is 1 day earlier. This problem has caused Christian apologists to develop elaborate explanations to avoid acknowledging
That wasn't an elaborate explanation. That was looking at the text.
glaring contradiction. Finally, Jesus' birth and death were supposedly accompanied by great supernatural events, including the appearance of the Star of Bethlehem, a 3-hour
Which
darkness
actually
coming-
interesting. We've actually got pretty interesting astronomical evidence for that sort of thing that is at least consistent with that. And a number of theories of what the exact that is have been offered. And there are some pretty interesting things for that specific topic. And there's an airplane that's about to, do its thing. So I'm just going to wait for that to end. Okay. And now he is making another argument from silence on darkness of the crucifixion. Oh, yeah. I was about to go there. Okay, yes, great. Yeah, IP does give evidence for the earthquake. I can't remember who exactly. I forget what university did the evidence for the earthquake, but it has been documented that there was an earthquake in 30 AD, and it makes perfect sense that the gospel writer would have mentioned it because it actually happened. And then for the rising of the dead saints, one could argue that that's apocalyptic imagery, as people like Mike Licona have done pretty persuasively that is a literary device used by Matthew. But then once again, we've got another argument from silence, and arguments from silence are just probabilistically really, really, really weak, because in many cases, and if we had a source that mentioned, another source that mentioned an earthquake, that could be very good evidence that that earthquake took place. But not having that source that mentions the earthquake is nowhere near an equal scale. It could be very weak evidence that this event didn't occur. So Tim McGrew labeled it the hidden spider fallacy. So seeing a spider within a coffee shop is very good evidence that a spider's in the coffee shop. But not seeing a spider in the coffee shop may be very weak evidence that there is a spider in the coffee shop. And in this case, not seeing a spider in the coffee shop isn't evidence because we don't have much of ancient history, and there are no authors that he can point to that he can really make a compelling argument for to have mentioned these events. Okay.
The land, massive earthquakes, and many dead Jewish saints resurrecting and wandering around Jerusalem. There were also
I mentioned the thing about the dead saints being apocalyptic imagery, which is what I would hold to.
Who witnessed Jesus' resurrection and ascension into heaven. Yet there is not a single record of any of this happening either.
I'm not going to grant to him. Listen. The thing is, I'm not going to grant that we can't use any of the New Testament sources. That's ridiculous. Who would have if you mention the resurrection of Jesus, and you mention that he appeared to people, if you mention that, you would have believed that would have occurred, and thus you would be, by definition, a Christian. If you believed in the resurrection of Jesus, you would have been a Christian. So, does he want eyewitness testimony, or does he not want eyewitness testimony? Because we have very early eyewitness testimony for the resurrection of Jesus in both the Gospels and 1 Corinthians 15, 3-8, which is a creed. Yeah. Him being biased against the New Testament is special pleading against the New Testament. And you've got the 1 Corinthians 15 creed, which almost unanimously historians date to within 0 to 5 years of the events of the crucifixion, 1 Corinthians 15, 3-8. So we've got very early evidence for Jesus appearing to people. So him saying that there aren't any records of that is dishonest.
Events occurred in some backwater region. Judea was a highly important strategic province for Rome, and during Jesus' time, the region was one of the most well-documented in ancient history.
That's okay. First of all, you've got you've got Philo and Josephus would have been the people that would have been mentioning these things, and it is a lie to say that you've got all these sources. We don't have these sources from ancient history. Aside from a few that I've just mentioned here, we don't have much of the ancient world. So, yeah, he's just wrong. Sorry.
Many contemporary writers recorded great volumes of information about the area. They even described several failed Jewish messiahs. Yet, despite Jesus supposedly performing many dramatic events, sermons, and miracles that were witnessed by thousands of people and garnered the attention of numerous high-ranking...
We've got 4 sources called the New Testament Gospels, which are ancient bioi. So it's not like we can just say, these are Christian sources, we can throw them out. Like I was saying before, bias is absolutely no correlation to truth. And given that these were most probably written by eyewitnesses, it's fine. We can use them. They're sources, and underlings needs to take account of that and can't just dismiss them a priori.
Officials, there is no evidence of anyone during that time writing anything about Jesus or the supernatural events that supposedly coincided with his birth and death. Such complete silence is simply not plausible if those events actually occurred. Many apologists also assume that Christianity started with Jesus and his teachings, and that it spread rapidly after his death. But that's not true either.
I'm sorry, actually, the historian on the planet would agree that Christianity was started by Jesus and it spread. I don't know. It depends on what you mean by rapidly, and that it spread around him. This is uncontroversial. I don't know how he's going to object to this.
That Christian communities already existed in cities as far away as Damascus, Antioch, and Rome, and for many years before Jesus' death. That's because there were multiple Christs throughout this period.
Many years before Jesus' death? Where on earth do you get that from the New Testament? What? None of those things mention the movement, the Christian communities before Jesus' death. Jesus had his following, that given that he was an itinerant preacher, but we didn't have Christian communities in places like Damascus before that. Like, where is he getting this from? Yeah, I don't know.
With Christian followers who used different gospels and disagreed on major doctrines.
Okay, now he's just bringing up the Gnostics, which are 2nd century at earliest. Early 2nd century. So bring up early 2nd century clear heretics who have no connection to the original disciples of Jesus whatsoever within the community. And that is clear from reading the early church fathers that, you know, yeah. Kyle said he's making stuff up at this point, which is absolutely true, and that was rejected by the church fathers. Yep.
And Christ was even crucified and resurrected. There is also no indication that any of them had ever heard of Jesus or his disciples. Even among the early followers of Jesus' Christianity, there were many, including church fathers, who were disturbed by how similar the Jesus story is.
Okay, so this is the appeal to Justin Martyr. Yeah, Justin Martyr actually says that Jesus and the pagans were very different. He was appealing to common ground, but then he was I just gotta get a drink of water here.
Okay. We're going to let Tim take a break for a second, and then we're going to continue. He can't hear us for some odd reason, but yeah. Johanna, what do you think so far?
It sounds like he's just regurgitating stuff he's been heard.
No, I mean, yeah, it sounds like he's just taking...
He probably has no idea the flaws of the stuff. It's just regurgitating what he's heard elsewhere.
Yeah.
You notice these atheists, they keep regurgitating. They think they're the smartest, and they just, like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Like, they don't do their homework. Like, if you would actually, like, if they would actually do their homework on this stuff...
Okay, sorry, I had to...
Most of this is addressed.
Yeah,
all right, we're going to let Tim continue.
Okay, so let's go on to this whole thing about he appeals to the Lord Raglan mythic hero archetype. And to say that Jesus was a copy of pagan myths,
pagan mythologies. Because of all this.
Okay, so he said pagan mythologies.
Regurgitating zeitgeist.
Johanna was just saying something, and I can't hear it, so... What did Johannan say? Yeah, he's regurgitating zeitgeist. So everyone here knows that stuff is garbage. Most of this stuff is made up. It doesn't make any sense in the context of Jewish Christians because Jesus was a Jew. The backdrop to understand Christianity is Judaism, not Hellenism. And Jews would have seen this as revolting. And most of the parallels, he shows a picture of Krishna. I mean, Christians would even have had access to that stuff in the first century. And Krishna wasn't crucified. Krishna wasn't resurrected. And I've done videos, IP has done videos on all the specific quote unquote parallels. And in most cases, they're literally making stuff up. Oh, whoops.
Christianity didn't radiate across the land and in an unstoppable wave of conversion, as apologists often claim. Instead, it grew slowly to only a few thousand members over the first 100 years.
Yeah, and that's because of the crucifixion of Jesus and the fact that Christianity thrived at all, and sources like Acts, and the fact that it was mentioned by these other historians do indeed show that it did grow in a pretty large sense, more than any of these other religions, other mystery religions. It's because of the honor shame aspect. Not all Christian tradition, but most of the sources used for Krishna that they would have to appeal to are well post-Christian as well, and you get that from many of these myths that they appeal to. Most of it is, well, I wouldn't say most of it, but a lot of it comes from after Jesus, and a literal Google search will show that to you. And so this whole zeitgeist nonsense has been debunked time and again. But then I was saying about the honor shame aspect. If people heard about the crucifixion and they said that, and they were hearing that people were saying Jesus was the Messiah based on the crucifixion, they would have rejected immediately. If they would have heard that he was a Jewish carpenter, they would have rejected it immediately. If they would have heard that he was physically resurrected, they would have laughed at it and been confused and thought that was a contradiction in terms, a crucified and resurrected Messiah. So the fact that Christianity survived at all, people like J.P. Holding have shown in The Impossible Faith that, and Rodney Stark in The Rise of Early Christianity, have shown that Christianity survived at all is it actually a testament to its historical reliability.
And languished as a fringe cult for over 300 years. Its factions bickered and fought among one another until one sect finally won out and declared itself the one true Christianity. But it wasn't until Rome collapsed that Christianity began to expand significantly.
Yeah, the fact is that all of our sources in the first century are Orthodox. So to say that the Gnostics had any real say in the matter is an ignorance of when these documents were written and when these communities came about.
Its teachings of disdain for earthly life and its embrace of poverty appealed to the rapidly growing population.
Wrong. Absolutely garbage. A misunderstanding of the cultural context of early Christianity. Let's end the video, then you can make conclusions. Okay. Yep. He's basically done anyway. So at the end of the video, he says Jesus probably existed anyway, which is actually really interesting. So, yeah, I was just going to say about the fact that Christianity thrived and appealed to the low lives. It wouldn't have appealed, no, because believing in someone who was resurrected and crucified by the Romans, which would have been seen as extremely shameful. It would have been like appealing to a pedophile today as your Messiah, an accused pedophile, that is, as your Messiah. It would not have been a popular idea at all, and that's why it didn't grow more than it did. All right, that's all I was going to say. Well, I probably droned on too much, but I still can't hear anybody, so yeah. Well, I had a lot of fun. I learned a lot about the many things earlier in the hangout as well. So thanks, Johannin. And I'm just going to leave even though I can't hear anybody.
Yep.
Yep, see ya.
Okay.
Kyle, you understand we were off air this whole time, right?
Huh? Yeah. I was recording. I could the video so his video thing is kind of messed up, but the viewer got the information, so we don't really need to. Some of that stuff is way over my head. I'm not really much of a history guy, but I know the basics. But yeah, I mean his whole case was just ridiculous. It's like, you know, they think they know everything about history when really they don't know anything at all.
Beforehand, we got to get rid of matter. That is a thing that has got to be destroyed.
I know.
If we get rid of matter, everything's on the toilet. Like, all of atheism is gone.
Yeah. Okay, so to conclude with underlinks, we're going to get off, so we're going to end the podcast, but so basically to conclude, his whole argument, or not just the arguments against the Kalam, but more specifically his objections to the Kalam depend on materialism, which we know is obviously wrong. So he's kind of question begging that whole framework in the first place. And then as far as the historicity of Jesus, again, that he obviously has not done his homework, and he hasn't looked into this stuff well enough to make these conclusions. So he's basically just repeating the same stuff that IP addressed in his video series. So yeah, so that's gonna end. Thank you guys for watching. This is gonna end the broadcast. God bless you all.